Sudan's city of El-Fasher descends into horror as the rapid support forces seize control, leaving bodies in the streets and families fleeing in despair. We examine the world's silence, the echoes of Darfur's genocide, and what this means for Sudan's fractured future. Then we head to Buenos Aires. Argentina's Javier Milei defies expectations with a stunning midterm rebound, backed by a $40 billion bailout and a renewed Trump alliance. Is this democracy's mandate or America's manipulation? I'm Henny Saif. Let's get in focus. From TV channels and AFP reports this week, Sudan's western city of El-Fasher has become a graveyard once more. Survivors recount entire neighborhoods were shelled before dawn. Families hid in trenches, while RSF paramilitaries stormed homes. Mothers saw their children executed. Bodies were left unburied in the streets, and the wounded were abandoned along the roads to Gami and Tawila. More than 36,000 civilians have fled in just days, adding to the 650,000 already displaced nearby. The United Nations warns of ethnic cleansing on a scale not seen since Darfur's first genocide. For many Sudanese, including US-based poet and activist Imtithal Mahmoud, the scenes evoke déjà vu. The same militias, now reborn as the RSF, continuing a cycle of impunity that the world once vowed never to repeat. We're joined by Mr. Ahmed Khattab, the political researcher and instructor of international relations at Georgetown University. His work focuses on migration, diaspora politics, citizenship, and the MENA region. Mr. Khattab, welcome to In Focus. As El-Fasher falls to the RSF and civilians describe atrocities reminiscent of early 2000s Darfur, do you see this as a return to a full-scale genocide or a new, maybe even darker phase of Sudan's disintegration?
Hello, and I'm glad to be and happy to be joining you here. I think this is a more dangerous situation than we had seen in the past in Sudan. Previously, we did have the Janjaweed militias, which became integrated into a larger structure that we now know as the RSF, the Rapid Support Forces, contain or attempt to contain rebellions that occurred in the Darfur region more broadly, the several Darfur states, and in the Kordofan region as well. I think the danger here lies in the much higher ambitions that the RSF and its leaders, specifically Hamidti or Mohammed Hamdan Dagalo, the ambitions that they have and the potential that they see in not only seizing larger territories of land, but in potentially taking over control of Sudan more largely.
Mm-hmm. Well, the RSF emerged from the Janjaweed militias, once accused of war crimes. Why has the international community failed to contain their resurgence, despite years of documentations and sanctions?
I think the issue mainly lies in the fact that the Sudanese political scene, specifically the issues that has international significance, going way back to the years when the Comprehensive Peace Agreement was concluded in 2005, followed many years later, or a few years later, by the referendum on South Sudan's independence. I think the issue here is that this was highly dealt within international circles or within diplomatic circles that had little influence on the ground. Sudan in itself was highly resistant to foreign interventions on the ground. And This meant that multiple players, including the RSF, continued to work within the shadows, even at the point of Bashir's departure or removal from power in 2019. They continued to consolidate networks. They continued to uh, um, build their networks both domestically and internationally in order to seize political opportunities. And I think the problem here is that they find a political opportunity, even if it comes in a very violent and a catastrophic way.
Well, speaking of violence, satellite imagery and survivor testimonies show mass graves and summary executions. Now, what mechanisms remain, legal or diplomatic, to hold the RSF leaders accountable when the ICC itself seems paralyzed?
Indeed, indeed, the scenes have been horrific. There have been terrible news coming out of El-Fasher specifically, and I think the main issue here is that perhaps there isn't as much that can be immediately done. I think many states and international organizations will attempt to sanction the RSF. They will put pressure on the RSF and its the international network of states or organizations and supporters. And I think that might put some pressure in order for the RSF to become more accountable. We've already seen news that RSF's leader has said that he is aware of the atrocities that have happened, and that there will be some sort of internal investigation. Of course, we don't know exactly how credible these statements are, and they are probably highly uncredible or not credible. But at the end of the day, I think sanctions or limitations on the RSF's ability to continue fighting, right? So in terms of funding, in terms of supplies of weapons, etc., will be the main factor in preventing the RSF from committing further atrocities.
Mm-hmm. So how does the humanitarian collapse in Darfur intersect with the regional dynamics, Egypt's border policies, Chad's refugee influx, and foreign involvement in Sudan's war economy?
I think the conflict only becomes more protracted at this stage. So unfortunately, Sudan's internal domestic political scene has been going through a cycle of deterioration. Not only is there a political crisis now, but largely a humanitarian crisis that only keeps escalating. I think this puts both pressure and responsibility on neighboring states, especially regional powers like Egypt. Egypt has already expressed its concerns, and it has expressed its willingness to engage positively with the crisis in Sudan in ways that not only ensure that there is political process that is inclusive and comprehensive, but also the prevention, hopefully, of no more humanitarian catastrophes like the ones that we have seen in Darfur most recently.
Mr. Khattab, many survivors are now scattered across the diaspora, forming a transnational Sudanese voice online. How significant is this digital diaspora in shaping global awareness and advocacy?
I think one of the fascinating things is that we continue to see not only interest by diaspora communities in the politics of their home states, and this is largely by choice. Many times, these are individuals who live very far away. They can make the choice of not associating anymore with the internal issues of their countries, or to associate in a very superficial way. But we actually see quite the opposite of this. We see this in the case of Sudan as well. And we actually see an activation of diaspora communities at the toughest moments and moments of crisis. And I think this is one where atrocities like what have just recently happened and other catastrophes bring the Sudanese diaspora together. So they highlight the challenges that Sudan face, and they push the Sudanese diaspora community in its multiple locations and in its multiple places to think of ways in which they could perhaps help. I think the main issue now would be how to improve the humanitarian situation within Sudan. And I think this is what the diaspora community is going to work on first and foremost before thinking of a more broad or strategic and political calculations going forward. Yes.
So your studies mainly focus on migration and citizenship. What does this conflict tell us about the statelessness in the MENA region, from Palestine to Sudan, and the erosion of belonging itself?
I think the problem here is that the movement of peoples uh, at many intervals in history both pose an opportunity and a challenge, right? So sometimes we can use the word threat, but I don't like to use the word threat very much. Most often, these are people who are forcefully displaced, and we have millions of forcefully displaced peoples in Sudan today. We also had millions of displaced people in Syria, right? Many of them have been returning, but I think the main issue here is that we do have large numbers of people who are struggling to find a sense of political justice within their local communities, right? So many of them flee due to war conditions, due to difficulty, due to even targeted attacks or killings, and I think that as long as there are unconsolidated political arrangements within these countries and a sense of injustice, migration is going to continue. The flow of peoples will find its ways. People carve their ways through countries, through the sea, and eventually arrive on the shores of places that they believe will provide them with a refuge, will provide them with hope, and will provide them for a better opportunity, not only for themselves, but perhaps for their children and the future generations as well.
Well, one final question, sir. Now, the world seems to be watching mass killings once again unfold in real time. What does this say about the state of international morality, about our collective memory of never again?
I think it's being put badly to the test. I mean, I don't want to say that we have failed that test already. Perhaps we have, but I try as much as possible to be optimistic and to keep a positive outlook. But I think the main problem here is that there's been an ongoing dehumanization, right? So we see that those groups, whether they are militaries or they are rebel groups or militias, find killing to be very easy. Human lives don't matter that much. Atrocities are committed without limits. So we have some news, for example, just going back to El-Fasher, that there have been attacks where hundreds have been killed in hospitals. Right? So we're talking about people who are sick, who are elderly, who are by no means combatants or fighters in any sense of the word. And when there are no limits, when there's no respect whatsoever to international humanitarian law, to perhaps what we believe to be necessary regulations and limitations to what can be done in war, then we only expect this to spiral. The problem here is if this becomes normalized, then we just see it more often. And I don't think anyone in the world wants to see this happen.
Most definitely not. Mr. Ahmed Khattab, thank you very much, sir, for joining us. Sudan's tragedy stands as a reminder that silence is never neutral. It's always a choice. From Africa's bleeding west to Latin America's economic crossroads, our next story takes us to Buenos Aires, where political shockwaves have redrawn Argentina's map and redefined Washington's reach. According to Foreign Policy, President Javier Milei's far right, La Libertad Avanza, defied expectations in Argentina's midterms, securing 41% of the vote. His libertarian reforms, savage cuts to public spending, and the taming of runaway inflation have polarized the nation. Yet just weeks before the vote, a $40 billion bailout from Washington tilted the balance, drawing praise from Milei and suspicion from his critics. The Trump administration called it an economic Monroe Doctrine. Critics called it political blackmail. Trump himself said he gave Milei a lot of help as Argentina celebrates lower inflation but higher poverty. The question now looms: did voters endorse Milei's austerity or America's influence? We're joined from Buenos Aires by Mr. Tobias Belgrano, the political researcher specializing in Latin American politics and populist movements. Welcome to In Focus. Now, Miele's midterm victory shocked analysts. To what extent do you think this result reflects genuine domestic support versus US pressure tied to Trump's administration and influence, the $40 billion bailout?
Hi, well, thank you for having me once again. So, the general surprise was complete. I mean, not even the polling companies expected these massive results in favor of La Libertad Avanza. The previous elections, or the previous elections in Buenos Aires province, almost 50 days before, were a victory for Peronism, and in the same district, Buenos Aires province, the libertarians were able to even get a victory there. So there's a lot of internal fight in Peronism right now, a lot of blames moving forward with each other. But I wouldn't suspect that the general feeling of the population was related to Trump, at least not entirely, mostly indirectly. I think the Argentinians were scared of having a massive economic crisis on the Monday after the elections. That was, I think, according to many opinion leaders, also internally here in the country, are saying right now that the fear of a comeback of Peronism and instability, political and economical instability for the economy was something that made the voters quite conservative this time, and they were able to surpass the narco-traffic scandal that has impacted the government in the days previously to administration, the elections, the corruption scandals that were before the previous election also. So I think the electorate prioritized economical stability instead of the corruption and corruption scandals. So that's partially thanks to Trump's bailout for Argentina.
Mm-hmm.
However, I wouldn't say that the voter related directly Trump into the equation. It was more the fear of the potential instability if Trump left the country and didn't help the Argentinian economy for the bailout. So I wouldn't say that it's in the idea of the voters when they went to vote, but the fear of instability was the main resource the government was able to take advantage of for this election.
Mm-hmm. Well, with the LLA party expanding its presence in Congress but still lacking a majority, can Miele truly consolidate his agenda, or are we entering a new phase of legislative gridlock?
Well, now Milei has the possibility of not being impeached, which is a very which was a big source of instability, especially for the markets before. Before the Buenos Aires elections, the government was in a struggle between the government and local governors, mainly of the biggest provinces. In Argentina, party discipline is very harsh, so governors have a great influence in Congress.
Mm-hmm.
So as governors got an intention with the government, the Congress was voting against the reforms by Javier Milei, which generate a lot of uncertainty to the international investors. So now the government has its own majority, and it doesn't need to borrow from other parties to form like temporary coalitions, which is what it was doing until now, or using presidential decrees to govern and enforce policy. So I think we're moving forward to a more tight scenario. However, La Libertad Avanza has the chance to make now bigger coalitions with what it was left from the former President Mauricio Macri government and from the Radical Party, which is now also in big minority, against the Peronist majority in Congress. So we're going to see a more struggled and complex scenario, probably more favorable to the libertarians to pass reform.
Mm-hmm. Well, about the $40 billion bailout, the foreign policy called it partisan interventionism. Do you agree with that, and how dangerous is this precedent for Latin American sovereignty? What parallels do you see with Washington's historic meddling in the region?
Well, yes, of course I agree with the party bailout. I mean, it's a partisan bailout in favor of Javier Milei. Mr. Trump also even said that if he wasn't going to be in power, of he would only help only Javier Milei, and not any Peronists. I mean, this is not a bailout to Argentina; it's a bailout to the Libertarian administration and Javier Milei's government. So there's no perception, at least from the Trump administration, of a state-to-state agreement rather than a political agreement, which will be a strong argument for the Peronists when they come back to power, because they will claim that this is a political agreement and they are not going to pay the foreign debt because it's a party debt, not a state-to-state debt. So that will be a problem in the future, especially for the Argentina-US relationship. And if we have previous historic events like that, yes, we had this in the past. However, after the Obama and the Bush administration, Latin America was not a priority for the US until even for the 80s. I mean, the last administration that had a strong interest in Latin America was the Reagan administration, that had the contras in Nicaragua and the tough perspective on Cuba, on Castro's Cuba. So we're seeing a region right now that it's getting a lot of relevance for Washington. I believe, in my opinion, is that because Washington is losing its hegemonic power internationally, and it's trying to reinforce its I'm sorry to say this, but it's what they perceive it as their backyard. As at least the political Trump administration perceives that they have to have their backyard in control, just like other spheres of influence internationally, for example, in countries like Russia, in Eastern Europe, etc., etc.
Mm-hmm. Well, Trump's transactional diplomacy, friends rewarded, foes punished, echoes Cold War tactics, yet without ideological depth. How's this shaping Latin America's perception of the United States?
Well, just a small comment. I don't think it's ideological, of course, but it's against China. Generally, the U.S. in Trump administration, in Reagan administration, and also in Bush administration, used a narrative, friend or foe. If you were, for example, with Reagan against communism, with Bush against the war on terror, and now Trump against China. The war is against China. Countries which are very close commercially to China are being punished, and countries which are very or intending to be allied to the U.S. more than China are benefited. So yes, I would say Argentina is the current case, and we haven't seen an economical bailout for a country in Latin America since 1919. So this is a new precedent in history. We also have Uruguay's case, but it was a short-term loan. It didn't last a long time, not as Argentina's loan that it's going to be paid in the following days.
Yes. Well, one final question regarding Argentina's economy now. Inflation has dropped dramatically, but poverty has surged. Are Milei's fiscal victory sustainable, or is Argentina's trading social cohesion, or is Argentina trading social cohesion for macroeconomic stability?
Yes, definitely, it's changing exchanging for social cohesion for macroeconomic stability. Partially that stability, which is what Trump is providing. Trump is providing the capability of the government not to accumulate foreign reserves, for example, to pay the IMF. Today, the IMF authorities asked the government to accumulate foreign reserves in the central bank, and the government's response was, we will do it next year or the following year. So there's no urgency in that, because that would generate an extra demand in US dollar. The extra demand in US dollar would translate into more prices and more inflation, higher prices and more inflation. And that's partially why Javier Milei is not accumulating foreign reserves.
Mm-hmm. Mr. Tobias Belgrano, thank you very much, sir, for your insights, joining us from Buenos Aires. From El-Fasher's unburied dead to Buenos Aires' political resurrection, today's episode traced two worlds united by silence and power. In Sudan, it is the silence of conscience. In Argentina, the silence of sovereignty. Both remind us that the line between rescue and control, between compassion and coercion, is growing ever thinner. And by this we come to the end of this episode of In Focus. I'm Henny Saif. Thank you for joining us.